Hey, Cypher here. So today I wanted to try a bit of an experiment. I recently presented a paper at a conference that was derived from a bunch of different things, including some stuff that I've hit on this channel. In fact, I explicitly mention the channel in the talk. So I thought I would re-record it and put some fancy graphics behind it or something along those lines, and then put it up on YouTube. Eventually, I want to build this up into an entire article, but I was only given 15 to 20 minutes to deliver it, so it's very short and possibly perfect for putting up on YouTube. Almost every sentence in this could be expanded into a paragraph or more, so it's kind of hard-hitting and quick. Since it was a conference paper, there's of course footnotes, so I'm going to include them in a pinned comment, and you'll see a little thing in the corner for every time I'm talking in a sentence or something that has a footnote. That way you can go and check the footnotes. Keep in mind this was hastily put together and is meant to be a vehicle to further work, so I definitely like your feedback on it. So without further ado, in the wake of such tragedies as the Vegas shooting, our culture tends to follow particular tropes. As shown by the spontaneous memorials that were created after the tragedy, some handle their grief, anger, and confusion through memorials. These also control a narrative of tragedy, but another narrative inevitably appears: mythology. Today, I'd like to briefly show how this has taken place before in Las Vegas surrounding another horrific killer named Kehoe, as well as how this time contrasts. America has a tendency to mythologize major events, but this inclination has its own tragic consequences that need to be counteracted. The October 1st shooting took 58 people's lives and injured over 500 others, out of 22,000 people attending the concert. After the tragedy, people created memorials quite spontaneously. All of the artifacts taken in by the Clark County Museum as part of the memorial collection were not organized in any official capacity, and were technically the legal equivalent of litter. These memorials told a story, even though, as one museum worker put it, "Don't expect it to make sense. It's going to be chaos. Just roll with it." This crazy quilt tells a story, both of grief for the victims and anger towards the shooter. But others have sown their doubts. Within a day of the shooting, conspiracy theorists began telling their typical fictions. Reminiscent of JFK's assassination, theories center on a supposed second shooter. Others take it to a repugnant extent, conjuring up the same vicious falsehoods they famously said about Sandy Hook being a hoax. We need not debunk their myths here. Instead, this is a pattern which inexorably occurs with such tragedies, and is worth inquiry. Unluckily for history, but luckily for the historian, there has been a prime example of this process taking place in southern Nevada before. We experienced a spate of what were called renegade Indians around the turn of the century, most prominent of which was a serial killer named Kehoe. He killed anywhere between 6 to 25 people between 1910 and 1990, and promptly disappeared into the Mojave. Though he was never caught alive, his mummified remains were found in 1940. The LA Times dubbed him the Mad Mummy. This is where Kehoe's legend took on celebrity status, for his mummy became a Las Vegas attraction. He was put on display at the Elks Lodge for 3 decades, along with everything else that was found with his corpse. He was an attraction in the Eldorado Days celebration of the 1950s and 60s, even supposedly hitching a ride with the mayor in an open car during one of the parades, something I really want to find photographic evidence of. After the Elks grew tired of their morbid exhibit, Kehoe floated around the valley, possibly being buried, strewn about the wash for the police to find, and eventually made it into the local university's collection. The University of Nevada, Las Vegas sold him to a Pahrump lawyer who quickly buried the remains under a poorly written gravestone just beyond Mountain Pass, in Cathedral Canyon. Kehoe had quite an afterlife, which in turn created its fair share of myths. By the 1950s, there were the typical rumors of buried treasure that inevitably mythologizes people who hide themselves away. Of particular importance is a little-known myth maker by the name of Harry Reid. In his amateur history of Searchlight, Nevada, he portrayed Kehoe as a rebel, lashing out against the oppression of white people, seen as a kind of anti-hero by Reed's parents. Of course, no one bothered to say something like this during Kehoe's lifetime. Instead, accounts tend to view him as a Hannibal at the gates. But this is the inevitable turn of myth-making surrounding famous killers. They become lionized through the use of an argument from silence. Or in other words, a story told through the absence of evidence rather than with evidence. One historian has pushed this myth-making parable, a Robin Hood theory if you will. Eric Hobsbawm romanticized such malicious characters as social bandits. These social bandits are said to be in a state of primitive rebellion, and he lists such examples as Joaquin Marietta, Jesse James, and Billy the Kid, all simply murderers, unless you speak to Hobsbawm. Kehoe was placed within this mythos by folks like Harry Reid, and with some accounts, we are already headed in that direction with the recent murderer. Conspiracists are following a similar pattern, though they are blocked by public mourning from outright lionizing this murderer. Another historian has a more cogent view of myth-making. Richard Slotkin says, "The myth of regeneration through violence became the structuring metaphor of the American experience. Though it has gone through many permutations, the basic idea is that men conquer the wilderness, save the girl, and in the process rejuvenate American civilization. Everything from Daniel Boone to the War on Terror can and has been mythologized this way. Society is attracted to violence, and myth-makers use this to play politics." Historian Catherine Olmsted has argued this and furthers it. She shows that conspiracism has two sides to it: governmental and anti-governmental. Governmental conspiracism, such as Red Scares and domestic spying, bolster anti-governmental conspiracism, but they all play a political purpose. The government's conspiracism here came when ISIS took false credit for the killing, which was used for fear-mongering for the War on Terror. Anti-governmental conspiracism is used to avoid the gun debate by blaming this on the government. We should be wary of this. Conspiracism has played a continual and violent part in history. As Slotkin clearly points to, mythologizing in the American mode necessarily creates an impetus to commit further violence. We have seen this play out in the past countless times. For instance, in 1992, an ATF and FBI arrest went badly at Ruby Ridge, Idaho, leaving a child and wife of the arrestee dead. 7 months later, some of the same ATF and FBI personnel participated in the Waco siege, which ended in the Branch Davidians being immolated. The family at Ruby Ridge and the Branch Davidians at Waco saw a conspiracy behind the ATF raids, so they resisted. But their deaths were not the end of it. A couple angry men got together believing these were conspiracies perpetrated by the three-letter agencies against peaceful people. They created a massive bomb and blew it up in front of a federal building in Oklahoma City on the 2nd anniversary of Waco. Oddly enough, the person being arrested at Ruby Ridge was also a neo-Nazi, and at the risk of godwinning this, I should add that Nazism was fundamentally propelled by a conspiracy theory called the stab-in-the-back myth. These are only some of the most lurid examples. Conspiracism motivates violence in a number of ways that need to be further explored, just not here. Obviously, we need good ways of combating this myth-making. As Slotkin and Olmsted pointed out, it does not suffice to simply debunk conspiracy theories. We must create better narratives to supplant their stories and show their vile side. Conspiracism's despicable nature is easily shown when they monetized their lies on YouTube, at least until news outlets publicized the problem. Demonetization became a particularly big deal around this event when Casey Neistat's charitable video on the subject was demonetized, despite media giants still making money on the tragedy. A documentary I made in August about Las Vegas history has been demonetized on my own channel. Yet InfoWars' myopic media is still monetized as of writing this. While YouTube accepts no responsibility for this, it tangentially does through its demonetization program. By allowing conspiracists to profit while demonetizing legitimate videos, they can incidentally value conspiracy theories over proper research. We need a better narrative of these events to counteract conspiracism, a coherent history that places these events in context. Richard Maxwell Brown's work provides an excellent template for what can be done. His idea is finding a strain of violence throughout American history and looking at the overriding themes. This could be done with mass shootings. and there is a possibility of showing it to be gendered, due to a potential commonality of domestic violence. Some work has been done, but no unifying history has been made. We need this to counteract spurious myth-making. Those myth-makers are conspiracists, and have followed a pattern. Kehoe shows one way it has happened, and how it might happen here. The spontaneous memorials narrative impedes the social banditry form, so myth-makers turn to conspiracy theories. Slotkin and Olmsted give us a way of conceptualizing their movement. Ultimately, we have tools to combat conspiracy theories beyond simple debunking. Now the history profession simply needs to do what it does best: tell a good and accurate story.